Hello, goblins and ghouls, and welcome to my Haunted Life podcast, your favorite paranormal podcast. I'm your host, Angela Hartshorn, and today we are doing some supernatural true crime. We are talking about crimes, mostly murder, in which Ouija board is the culprit. Hello, my darklings. I hope you are all doing wonderful and spectacular, and I hope this podcast finds you well today. You deserve a break. Go buy yourself a little treat. You earned it. So, when this podcast comes out, I believe I will be spending my last day in New Orleans teaching a few classes for a secret witch society. As I am writing this, I am watching all the horrible news about the terrorist attack. I have spent most of the morning crying. I used to go down to New Orleans a few times a year. There was a few events that I went down for. And that's why there's so many New Orleans story on here. I love it. I considered it a second home. It just has that feeling. So many people talk about that, and it's not a cliche. There's something special about it. There's still not a lot of information yet. All of my close friends are accounted for. Most woke up to me texting this morning to see if they were okay, because apparently I get up too damn early. But very thankful so far. My heart is just breaking for those that just wanted to have a fun night out and their families that have lost them. The next episode, I'm doing one of my favorites from New Orleans that I've been sitting on for a while because I wanted to do it right. And now that I think about it, I think I teased about it for the Halloween season and it never got finished. Oops. Anyways, but as more information comes out and hopefully some relief websites, I'll be able to share more here. I still want to do something to help, but I haven't figured that out yet. That will probably be in the next podcast. I didn't want to bring down this episode like that, but I felt like I needed to say something. So now for an awkward transition, because the rest of this I wrote before the tragedy and didn't have the brain power to change it. So, trigger warning, murder is involved. Some pretty ghastly, honestly. If you're like me and killing of animals is just too much, heads up. We have a dark dog story in here. So, yeah, keep that in mind. On today's podcast, I'm doing the thing I promised you from the last podcast. Oh my god, I'm following up. We are doing Ouija board crimes, like we talked about with John Kozik from the Salem Witch Board Museum. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, I highly recommend it. And then come back and listen to this one. Or just listen to this one, because I have no control over you, and this one's fun. Not that murder is fun, but you know what I mean. Or maybe it is. I haven't tried it. But if I did, I would definitely involve a Ouija board in some way. Just the aesthetics of the whole thing. I also wanted to let you know that a lot of stories are very short snippets that I found. But then I went a little crazy with some of the research and started finding primary sources. So, if you want a deeper dive on any of them, let me know. I would have so much fun just doing a whole podcast out of any of these short stories. The ones I could find. Some were a little hard. I have a feeling this podcast might be 2 podcasts, because again, it's me. I got excited. So, let's get into it, shall we? Grab yourself a cup of tea, make sure the doors are locked and the planchette is close by. I have a story to tell you. Most of these stories come from, of all places, the Reader's Digest. They had a big list. And something about them coming from the Reader's Digest just tickles me for some reason. Not all of them, but most. I tried to put the stories in chronological order. Also, one thing that really surprised me is just how many more modern ones there were. I was expecting a lot from like the 1930s, and there's a couple. When, people started really freaking out about spiritualism, but didn't expect so many stories from like 2000 on. There's quite a bit. So, the scandal of the century. The murder of Clothid Marchand. This article is from the Forest Lawn Cemetery out of Buffalo, New York. Are you familiar with the story of Clothid Marchand? Mrs. Marchand died 89 years ago this week, March 6, 1930, the victim of a murder that was referred to at the time as the scandal of the century. Clothid Marchand was the wife of Henry Marchand, a French artist, renowned sculptor who studied under Rodin and became a specialist in dioramas and precision wax modeling. In the early 1900s, Henry and Clothid, who was also an artist, immigrated to the United States. Mr. Marchand began working as a diorama artist at the New York State Museum. His work on the museum's Iroquois dioramas, dedicated in 1912, earned him recognition. In 1925, the couple and their family moved to Buffalo, where Henry and his sons, Paul and George, were to construct dioramas for the Society of Natural Sciences, later the Buffalo Museum of Science. Note, though most of the work of the merchants created there is no longer on display, some still can be seen, particularly in the museum's Hall of Wildflowers. That sounds pretty. In the course of his work on the dioramas, Mr. Marchand, Henry worked closely with the Senecas, and he became intimate friends with a young Seneca woman named Lila Jimerson, who modeled for him. On March 6, 1930, Marchand's youngest son came home from school to their house at 576 Riley Street to find his mother sprawled across the first floor landing. At first, it was thought that Clothid's death was the result of a fall down the stairs, but the medical examiner soon found bloody gashes, the odor of chloroform, and signs of a furious struggle on the body of the tiny French woman. The police were brought in, and after close questioning of Henry, were soon on the trail of Miss Jimerson and a 68-year-old woman who turned out to be her friend and possible accomplice, Nancy Bowen, a Seneca tribal healer. First, Jimerson was arrested, and then she named Bowen. During the investigation, it was learned that Jimerson was convinced Bowen that Mrs. Marchand was a white witch who used her powers to kill Bowen's recently deceased husband, Charlie, also known as Sassafras Charlie Bowen, another Seneca healer. The conclusion was apparently drawn by the two women over a Ouija board, as they sought an explanation for Charlie's death. Slowly, the board revealed a startling message from Sassafras Charlie. "They killed me. Who did it? the women asked. The board spelled out, letter by letter, Clothild. Clothild? Clothild? It added the killer's address on Buffalo Riley Street. Curiously, Jimerson said she was acquainted with a woman by that odd name. I agree with that. Clothild Merchant, the wife of the man with whom Jimerson was modeling for. After the seance, Bowen received several letters, signed Mrs. Dooley, explaining that Clothild Merchant was a witch who had hexed Sassafras Charlie out of jealousy. Her witchcraft didn't work so good, so she decided to kill him, one letter said. The healer grew convinced that Clothild killed her husband, and she was next. On the faithful day of the murder, Bowen went to the merchant's house and knocked on the door. When Mrs. Merchant opened it, Bowen confronted Clothild and accused her in broken English of being a witch. Nancy Bowen pulled a hammer and beat the French woman, then finished the job by stuffing chloroformed-soaked paper down her throat. This poor woman. Oh, sorry. There's more to tell you later. Anyways, there were 2 trials. In the first one, the featured trial attraction was Henry Merchant, the husband, who admitted Jimerson was one of his many lovers. Quote unquote, too many to count. He's one of those. You're gonna hate him, he said, including a number of Native Americans. He said it was a professional necessity, quote unquote, to seduce Indian women because it made them more willing to pose naked for his diorama modeling. He said his wife consented to his free love lifestyle. Quick sidebar here, and this is from the other article, away from the article. I found another article that was an interview with this man from prison, because he was also arrested in connection, accomplice, I guess. He claims he only wrote Lila Jimerson numerous love letters. So that was one of the things that they found, was that she had these love letters from him. And like, proof, dude, because first he kind of tried to deny it, and then it was like, hey, we have your letters. He claimed that he only wrote these letters to her, these love letters, because she had consumption, tuberculosis, had only one lung left, so he didn't think she would be around that much longer, and he wanted to cheer her up. Also, in that same interview, he described his wife as his pal. So I feel like I could safely say, fuck this guy. Also, he gets worse, even from here. So that's at the end. You'll know exactly which part I'm talking about. It's coming up. Also, there's all these pictures in like the newspapers of him with all the family and everything supporting him, just making him look like this wonderful family man. He also made a big deal on the size of his wife. Everything is my little wife, and how she was only 90 pounds. I don't know. Anyways, back to the article, the original article. But during the court proceedings, Jimerson suffered a flare-up of a respiratory condition, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. Then she pled guilty to second-degree murder from her hospital bed, but retracted the plea soon afterwards. Acclaimed lawyer Clarence Darrow, which I feel like I know that name. I should have looked that up. 1 second. Okay, I'm glad I looked it up, because this guy did a lot of trade union causes, but the big cases that he did was Leopold and Loeb murder trial, and also the Scopes monkey trial. I think that's why I know his name. But I didn't know the Leopold and Loeb one. That's pretty cool. Anyways, so kind of a big deal. He was brought in to make sure Jimerson got a fair trial, but he ended up not taking the case. So it kind of shows you the national attention this was getting. At a second trial 1 year later, Jimerson testified she was foolishly in love with Margent Henry, but was not a party to the murder. She implicated Henry himself, saying he told her he was tired of his wife. Jimerson was acquitted and freed. Bowen was released after pleading guilty to manslaughter and accepting a sentence of time served. So after all that, this woman doesn't get justice of any kind. By the time of the second trial, Henry, the husband, had moved to Albany and married his dead wife's niece, who was 18. He's like 56 at this point. Or he was 56 at the trial. So, a couple years after that, basically 60, married his wife's 18-year-old niece. Never prosecuted, he died in 1951. Lila Jimerson married a local man and lived a long life in Perrysburg, New York, near her old reservation. She died in 1972. So, that one long, she lasted a while. Clothed merchants' paintings were exhibited only once in a 1930 memorial tribute. According to her daughter, Henrietta, I just realized that the husband's name is Henry, their son's name is Henry, and the daughter is also named after him, Henrietta. My God. She was a true artist who never had a chance. Clothed merchant is buried in Section 40 in Forest Lawn in an unmarked grave. So I thought that was sad. Poor Clothed. This next article might be one of the strangest I have ever read. Not necessarily because of the context. We are talking about Ouija board murders, after all. And this one is apparently the first crime that blames the board directly for the murder. But it is the writing in this one. Also, I'm going directly from the article itself. So bear with me. It's a little blurry. This was so good, I had to read it to my husband to give you an idea. And the whole thing is gorgeously laid out. I will be putting this on the Patreon. Don't worry, I already have it saved. But the pictures, the illustration, all from this article, it's so good. So the headline reads, former, quote, Venus, unquote, pins final hope on state Supreme Court in fight to escape prison for 15 years. Dorothea Turley, convicted of Ouija board murder of her naval officer husband through medium of young daughter, is center of rangeland feud in Arizona. Then there's a little picture of the daughter, Maddie. Says, little caption, Maddie Truly, a 15-year-old daughter of Mrs. Truly, is serving 6 years at the Arizona State School for Girls after testifying she shot and killed her father at the command of a Ouija board and her mother. And there's a picture of the mom. And it says, Mrs. Dorothy Truly, New York City American Venus of 1918, which I'm assuming is like a beauty pageant, has stirred the worst rangeland feud in recent years in Arizona, as she ends a 3-year fight to avoid serving a term of 15 years for the Ouija board murder of her husband, Ernest, retired naval officer. Okay, this article is by George Max, Central Press correspondent. St. John's, Arizona, May 26. Also, this is from 1936. Chosen the bathing beauty Venus of the nation, vivacious Dorothy Turley set men's hearts to thumping during World War days to the tunes of Tipperary and Over There. Branded a murderess in a fantastic melange of cowboy lovers and Ouija boards, the same statuesque Dorothea Turley today is setting men's fingers to toying with triggers to the tune of The Music Goes Round and Round. For 3 years, this one-time toast of Paris and Berlin has been the center of one of the stormiest rangeland feuds in the history of the Apache Mountain wilds of Arizona. For 3 years, hard-riding buckaroos have fought for and against her, hands idling on gun holsters as she has struggled to prove herself innocent of the slaying of her husband, Ernest, a Naval Reserve officer. Before High Court. Sorry, I had to make sure I was recording. This month, the Arizona Supreme Court will rule on some of the strangest questions ever propounded to any high tribunal. Can a Ouija board think and act by itself? Or may it be influenced by human hands? Would a 15-year-old, quote-unquote, baby Venus daughter deliberately send her mother to prison because that mother, scroll up, objected to rouge and short skirts and her, quote-unquote, looking that way at boy friends? That confused my husband when I was reading it to him. 2 separate words. I think they mean men or friends who happen to be boys. I could be wrong. Sun-bronzed, fast-shooting Sheriff Marin Hawes has already answered those questions to the satisfaction of one jury. He and his deputies obtained for the prosecution a tale of how Dorothea sat down at a Ouija board one night with her daughter Maddie and persuaded the Ouija board to command Maddie to kill her father, which the girl did 2 days later. It looked as if it were an accident at first. Maddie said that she was running along behind her father and stumbled, the fall discharging a shotgun she was carrying. Murder! Lanky Sheriff Hawes, who is a little bow-legged from a lifetime riding the range, found some time later that the slugs entered her father's back in such a direction that they could have only been fired only by someone standing erect and aiming. Maddie confessed that her mother had encouraged her to shoot him because Mrs. Turley was in love with a cow puncher. And then there followed lurid tales of, quote-unquote, petting parties in the canyon wilds at night when the former Venus and her cow puncher asserted staged parties. I don't know if they mean just the 2 of them getting together or weird cowboy orgies. Kind of hoping for the cowboy orgies. The news divided the range riders as Dorothea Truly had protested her innocence. Armed cowboys have stormed the courthouse to demand justice and have threatened to take the law into their own hands. Others, equally determined, have sworn to keep the one-time beauty winner in prison for the 15 years decreed by the First Court, even if they have to stand guard. Mrs. Truly contends that she could not have controlled a Ouija board and that her daughter is solely to blame if the shooting were not an accident. I really feel safe with this woman giving stories. Her story. Mrs. Truly related, Maddie was angry with her father and me. We didn't want her to use rouge or to run around at night with the cowpunchers or to cross her legs the way she did or to wear such short dresses. She has been influenced to place the blame for killing on me because some of the cowboys didn't like me. Which I'm so confused because I thought it was the mom that was into the cowboys. Maybe they both are. Nothing wrong with that. Maddie, who was sent to the state school for girls, has consistently clung to the story of the Ouija board. It was dark in the room and there were only the shadows from the flickering lamp. She has written as a part of the evidence the Supreme Court will hear. Mother asked the Ouija board, "Shall we kill father?" And the pointer moved to yes. Mother asked who should do the killing, and the pointer spelled out my name. Mother said that I must not refuse to follow the command of the Ouija, or I will suffer terribly. So there's that. I can't help but side with Maddie on this one. Something seems strange. Yeah, I can't help but think that it's the Ouija board being used by her mother to influence her, like she said. I'm siding with Maddie on this one. Also, heads up, with a lot of these stories, you'll figure out really quick that the Ouija board is just used as a sensational tool. They are usually there to influence someone or being used by somebody who's not in the best place mentally. That's going to come up lot. All right. We have a good 1980s satanic panic version now. I love the stories of like Satanism from the 80s that were actually those stories. Like, I love it. Okay. Anyways. Taped confession at murder trial tells of satanic sacrifice. And this is from the St. Petersburg Times from Tampa, Florida. Or now I think it's the Tampa Bay Times, but from Florida. Friday, March 17th, 1989. Oh, it's St. Patrick's Day. That's why there's a creepy advertisement leprechaun underneath this article. Oh, that makes sense. Anyways. Make big again. There we go. Daytona Beach. Jurors sat in trance as they heard a taped confession in which a defendant detailed the 1987 mutilation and murder of a motorist he said was killed as a human sacrifice to Satan. Anthony Allen Hall listened quietly Wednesday to his taped confession in which he said there was excitement in the air, quote unquote, and something came over me, quote unquote. When he shot to death Nog Van Dang, 25, in the woods off of a Florida highway. I'm just going to throw this out there. Nothing good happens on Florida highways. Just throwing that out there. Hall's companion, Bunny Dixon, then 16, used a knife to carve an inverted cross from Nog's breastbone to his stomach to prepare him as a human sacrifice to Satan before the shooting, according to his taped confession to the police. Hall, 25, a native of Pitcairn Islands in the South Pacific, is charged with first-degree murder and Nog's death. His trial is presided over by Circuit Judge S. James Foxman, was expected to last through next week. Hall Mix Dixon. So he's like 10 years older, first of all, than his 16-year-old girlfriend. Daniel Bowen, 23, and his girlfriend, Elizabeth Town, 18. What's with the teenage girls? Seriously, guys. Are accused of hijacking Knox's car in Orlando on July 20th, 1987. That's even before I was born. And taking him to the woods near Daytona Beach, where he was shot 7 times in the head, neck, and torso. This is such a weird snippet to add in, but why not? State Attorney John Tanner, who gained national attention earlier this year for having befriended convicted serial killer Ted Bundy while serving in the Florida prison's lay ministry program, is seeking the death penalty for Hall. Seems a little hypocritical. Before the shooting, Miss Dixon, described in court as a practicing Satanist, carved a large inverted cross on Knox's chest to designate him as a human sacrifice. There was excitement in the air. It was just like craziness, Hall told Sheriff's investigator Bernard Busher. Hall said he and the other 3 decided to abduct and rob a motorist in Orlando to get cash and a car for a trip to Virginia. The women posed as hitchhikers, Hall told police, and Bowen and Hall hijacked Knox's car at gunpoint when he stopped for the girls. Knox was robbed of approximately $120, bound and gagged with tape, and put in the trunk of his car. Hall's attorney, Gerald Keating, said Miss Dixon devised the plan on the orders of David, the spirit of a 10-year-old boy with whom she claimed she communicated through a Ouija board. Bunny said that she had to sacrifice him or put a cross on his stomach, an upside-down cross. Hall said. He said he held Knox down while Miss Dixon carved the cross on Knox's chest and stomach. Knox then was shot after being laid on his back, according to the taped confession. Oh, he was alive when they carved him up. That's so sad. Once I started shooting, Hall said on the tape, I just couldn't stop, or I couldn't quit. Something came over me. I just kept shooting. Hall said he emptied his .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol into the supine man. After the shooting, the 4 drove to North Carolina. Hall said he and Miss Dixon abandoned Bone and Miss Town in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, after Miss Dixon informed him that David had warned her Bowen was going to kill them. Hall said he later left Miss Dixon with Knox's car in Salem, Arkansas, where she was arrested on August 1st, 1987. The same day Hall was arrested in West Plains, Missouri, by Howell County Sheriff Hubert Holman, who was acting on a tip. Hall's companions, also charged with murder, are to be tried separately. I'm just going to throw this out there. I think I might have to do a deep dive on this one. I think I want to know everything about Bunny and David. This might be our deep dive. Let me know what you guys think. 'Cause insane. Absolutely insane. So this next one is surprisingly short, and I just could not find any sort of follow-up on this. The fact that it was actually published somewhere in a somewhat reputable newspaper out of England is the only reason I decided to include it in this podcast. And maybe I just didn't spend enough time researching it, but I almost took it off for thinking maybe it was just urban legend, because there were a couple stories I ended up not doing, which is surprising right now, because I just couldn't find evidence, especially of like Ouija board stuff. Murder, yes. Ouija board, not necessarily. So, but this is all I got for this. Ouija board killer sent to Broadmoor, Thursday, 19th December 1996. A devil worshiper who stabbed a 15-year-old boy to death after a Ouija board spelled out the word kill was ordered to be detained indefinitely in Broadmoor. Michael McCollum, 20, turned his bedroom, Walworth, southeast London, into a shrine to the devil where he lured Michael Eridge and his friend Stephen Corrin, also 15, the Old Bailey herd. It ended with McCollum sitting astride Eridge and plunging a foot-long combat knife 11 times into his chest and neck, while his horrified friend looked on. And that's it. The only other time I have mention of this was Reader's Digest and Ranker, of all places. And that was it. It's a little strange. And the Ranker one did add that allegedly, because he did it because he believed Satan had ordered him to do it. McCollum ended up accepting a manslaughter plea and served his time in a mental hospital, which I'm assuming is what the Broadmoor is. Which is really funny because if you're from Colorado Springs, the Broadmoor is a 5-star fancy-ass hotel. So hearing it as like a mental institution just kind of gives me the giggles. But yeah, that one I searched for quite a bit and was surprised I could not find too much more on it. So, some of the stories I found, the murders or crimes aren't necessarily associated directly with the Ouija board, but are in there. And this is one that kept coming up that I felt like needed to be a part of this. It's one of those that the murder itself wasn't Ouija board related, but the Ouija board plays a huge part in this story. So, this is an article entitled, "Who Killed You? The Jurors Who Used a Ouija Board to Find a Murderer Guilty," by Michael Delaney and Damien Carrick for The Law Report. I believe we talked about this a little bit with John from the Salem Witch Board Museum, because he kind of mentions it. I believe this is the same case. In 1994, English insurance broker Stephen Young was found guilty of the gruesome double murder of Harry and Nicola Fuller. When the sentence came down, Sussex police detective Graham Hill believed justice had been served. The couple had been found dead on the floor of their home a year earlier, with Nicola shot 3 times and Harry shot in the back at close range. The lead investigator on the case, Mr. Hill, said the verdict, which followed a 5-week jury trial, marked the end of a difficult period. There was relief. The case was finished, he said. Obviously, all people that are involved in the prosecution were pleased with the verdict. Pleased the verdict was a guilty one, because there's as you can imagine, a huge amount of work that goes into that. 1 month after the trial had concluded, a front page headline of the now defunct News of the World newspaper appeared out of nowhere and hit like a shot. Murder jury's Ouija board verdict. Booze, dirty jokes, and then the Ouija board. The report quoted the youngest member of the jury, 24-year-old Adrian, who said the jurors had tried to consult the spirits of the dead when locked overnight in Brighton's Old Ship Hotel. I'm assuming it's like sequestered? As the other jurors slept, the small group sat on the floor around a crude Ouija board they made from a piece of paper and the hotel room wine glass. They each put a finger on the glass and asked the spirit to guide the glass over the letters to the alphabet and the words yes or no. One juror, Ray, took charge of addressing the spirit, which identified itself via the glass as Harry Fuller, the man who was murdered. Ray asked, "Who killed you?" The glass spelled out, "Stephen Young done it." He said, "How?" The glass spelled shot. As the jurors discussed what they should do, the glass spelled out, "Vote guilty tomorrow." By the end of the seance, some of the jurors were crying. A few jurors would later say they felt they had gone too far. The group retired to their rooms and agreed to not tell the others what they had done. Just a few weeks later, their actions were causing controversy around the world. Graham Hill still remembers his disbelief when a neighbor passed him the newspaper front page over the garden fence. Probably your initial thought would be, well, it'll prove that it's a lot of old nonsense, he said. The headline was just the beginning of a case that would become one of the most high-profile examples of juror misbehavior in the world. This is a really wonderful article, and it goes into so many different examples of juror misbehavior. At this point, the article is tagged. The link is down below. I don't want to go through all of them because they're not overly related to Ouija board stuff, so I'm skipping ahead a lot. Following the revelations in the News of the World, the UK Court of Appeal squashed the double murder conviction of Stephen Young and ordered a new trial. These guys got him a mistrial. Luckily, they tried him again. But after a 5-week hearing in December 1994, the jury found Stephen Young guilty again. And there's like so much money and time and effort wrapped up into these things. Oh man. Responding to the Court of Appeals decision, Nicola Fuller's father said the Ouija board jurors made a complete joke of our daughter's death. Hill agreed. This whole story is really insane. And there's a guy who wrote a book about this. So this would be another one I'd be totally cool with doing a deep dive on. Just throwing it out there again, you guys. All right, my loves, my darklings, I'm going to stop there for today. That way this episode is not like 5 hours long. Remember, let me know what your favorite story is and what you would like me to do a deep dive on. Could be more than one. We'll see. I think I'll put out like a poll in the group on the Facebook group for people to actually vote on and keep it organized. So I'm kind of excited about that. I'm really hoping it goes well. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on the next episode. Because some of the stories coming up are even more gruesome. And a lot more of them are modern. I think Are we at the 2000s now that I say that? Making sure real quick. There's that one. There's our jury one we just talked about. Yeah. So, from here on out, we are in the new millennium. So, there you go. It's really interesting how the newer ones oddly get darker. I don't know. They're all pretty dark, let's be honest. Maybe just because there's more detail with regular access to information and media. I don't know. But, yeah. So, don't forget to subscribe. That's the whole point, so you don't miss out. Thank you to everyone out there listening today. These have been so much fun and a great way to get back into the rhythm of doing the podcast again. And who doesn't love Ouija and murder? You know what I mean. My Haunted Life podcast is written, researched, produced, edited, and hosted by me, Angela Hartshorn. All of my sources are going to be posted on the Patreon page. One of my goals for this next year is to organize the Patreon more, since the website is just so simple. That's also where the pictures, the videos, info, whatever I have for this week's episode is going to be posted, including all the newspaper clippings I found if you are a primary source girly like me. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, consider supporting the show, please. You can subscribe to the Patreon page. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. I love doing the show, and it is a labor of love. This is my hobby. This is what I do for fun. I wish I made a living off of it. I wish I could retire and just wander around the country ghost hunting and doing the podcast. But that's not where I am right now. So, and if you can, throw like $2 at me. If you have Ouija board stories or crimes committed by Planchette, I want to hear them. Or, any ghost story you want to share. Email me at myhauntedlifepodcast@gmail.com. Or you can write me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and now YouTube. I love the YouTube. And all of those are at My Haunted Life Podcast. While you are there, please like and follow and comment. It honestly makes my day. And let's not forget the podcast group. I love hearing your stories so much, and I definitely want to get more interviews lined up this year. I love all of it. Tell me everything. Music is by Ghost Stories Incorporated. And that's it for this one. Stay spooky.